Hi class, I hope you've had a chance to read over this text. If so, you've noticed it's very dense, so I'm here to help us get through it together. This reading is 14 pages, it's not very long, but Bourdieu went all out with his theory. We're going to start by understanding the context surrounding this essay, because you simply cannot read and understand Bourdieu without knowing more about him and why he decided to write. Pierre Bourdieu, our author, is a very influential sociologist and as famous as any sociologist can get. He's French, which is important for two reasons. One, his analysis should be viewed in terms of global history, not specifically American. Two, this reading is a translation of a speech Bourdieu gave in 1978 and published in English in 1991. So, we have a very theory-focused French intellectual who is writing specifically so only highly educated people can understand him. So, I hope that together we can get through all of the jargon and make sense of Bourdieu's fancy words. The other thing that we need to cover before beginning is Bourdieu's most famous theory, habitus. Habitus refers to a subjective but not individual system of internalized structures, schemes of perception, conception, and action common to all members of the same group or class. Put simply, within the habitus, some things are valorized and some are not. So what the hell does this mean? Well, the habitus is the underlying structures of social life that become ingrained in how we physically move or talk in the world. How we behave is conditioned. This means that we make choices because of habitus. In sport and social class, Bourdieu uses habitus to say that even though people may think they choose their sport, they are really pushed by a series of underlying social and cultural influences. This here is the goal of Bourdieu's work in sport and social class. He wants to understand why sports exist in the first place. And since they do, why do certain people seem more likely to do certain sports? Are people drawn to what seems most fun, or is it something deeper? Bourdieu, with his complex argument, is saying that sports are actually a lot deeper than just fun exercise. So let's begin on the first page, where Bourdieu lists different kinds of sports: rugby, football, swimming, tennis, golf, etc., and ask the reader to consider if these sports are a supply intended to meet a social demand. Let's explore this question. First, how are all of those sports listed related? Well, they all require physical movement. Okay, so that would be saying that humans have a need for physical movement. And as we evolved in societies, we've made fun ways to exert our energy. Okay, so ask yourself, does that make sense? Do you personally have a need to play sports? If you said no, Bourdieu agrees. He asks the reader to consider this. How is the demand for sports products produced? How do people acquire the taste for sport, and for one sport rather than another, whether as an activity or as a spectacle? There's two things happening here. First, he says, okay, maybe humans do have a need for physical movement. Why then are there so many different versions? Why doesn't everyone just swim or run or agree on one form of exercise? Instead, we have a bunch of sports and everyone has their favorite. And because it's your favorite, you will go watch a game. This is what Bourdieu is trying to understand. How the hell did sports get created, and why do people go watch them? He uses a very specific word to describe sports games: spectacle. Bourdieu doesn't give a great definition in the text for spectacle, but in context, he means an event where suspense and anxiety keep the viewer's attention, not just on the action happening, but a spectacle is the entire event. A man swallowing a flaming sword is a spectacle. It's dangerous and exciting. People go to a circus to see this spectacle. So, if we follow that logic, circuses are in the business of selling commercial spectacles. Your favorite sports team is in the business of selling spectacle as well. So, if sports began as a fun way to burn off some energy, and today are huge spectacles with owners and managers and referees who enforce strict rules, what happened between these 2 points? How did this shift occur and why? Again, how did local community games of fun become these huge mass spectacles with many different teams where everyone has their favorite? So in the search for his answer, Bourdieu finds that sports have their own historical tempo. This means that even if we examine baseball in the 1930s, World War II doesn't play a huge effect on the culture of baseball. Now, baseball doesn't exist in a vacuum. I'm sure that there were cheers in the stands about beating Nazis and commies, But this has more of an implication on the culture of America rather than baseball. Because again, Bourdieu is viewing sports from a global perspective. Sports don't use words and are played all over the world. Local culture doesn't have a huge impact on soccer as an activity, but soccer still changes over time, just at its own pace, loosely connected to surrounding historical events. So, Bourdieu continues on page 3, noting, "It seems to be indisputable that the shift from games to sports, in the strict sense, took place in the educational establishments reserved for the elites of bourgeois society, the English public schools, where the sons of aristocratic or upper bourgeois families took over a number of popular games." Bourdieu is using popular here to mean vulgar or low class, things that were not meant for and were beneath the elite. Okay, this is an observation, not really an argument. The shift from games into sports was initiated because of rich young men in English private schools. Notice here that this shift is specific to men. So, if we return to the initial argument that sports are natural, Bourdieu here disagrees. Women may have played games, but were absolutely not involved in the shift to sports. So, if both men and women weren't involved together, then this means it's not human nature. Not only was this shift isolated to men, it was specifically wealthy young men. The rest of English society still played folk games at community gatherings. The kids would go out and entertain themselves with sticks and rocks, and the adults may have played with dice or ran races. Pure human fun. This was the popular culture that the wealthy elite adopted and transformed. So how? That's the question. You and I could say, hey, look at those poor people with their sticks and rocks. Let's steal it, make it bougie. But we would have a hard time sharing this with other people, and even harder time establishing shared rules. But you know the perfect place to create meaningless and obscure rules? School. This is Bourdieu's conclusion. As he writes, the school is the site, par excellence, of what are called gratuitous exercises, where one acquires a distant, neutralizing disposition towards language and the social world. School gives you a disconnected understanding of the real world, so it's perfect for playing games with a fake goal and introducing strict rules. You might be saying, okay, Alex, but why wasn't this true for all schools? Why only rich boys? It's a good question. Well, not everyone went to school. Bourdieu is super into this idea of capital, something you may be familiar with. Capitalism, the economic system of America, functions on the idea of accumulating the most capital possible. In a way, capitalism is kind of a game. Capital, or power, is the building block of society. Bourdieu distinguishes between 3 different forms of this capital. Economic capital, which is money, cultural capital, and this refers to the cultural knowledge, skills, and values that individuals acquire through their upbringing and education. If I know a lot about basketball, and I'm in a group talking about basketball, I have a lot of cultural capital. I can exchange this cultural capital for social capital. Social capital. This is a bit hard to explain, but it may help to think of in terms of clout. If you're with a group who knows a lot about basketball, and you have cultural capital in the form of basketball knowledge, they're going to respect you more. But if you're in a group talking about Shakespeare in the antebellum era, your knowledge of basketball offers you 0 cultural capital, and in turn, no social capital. Okay, if you need to take a break and review what we've covered so far, let's do it now. We know that people created games, but it's a little unclear if we as people created these games for physical exercise, fun, or both. Bourdieu is pretty sure, though, that humans get enough physical exercise from their daily labor. Remember, we're talking about people who had to labor for everything. They grew their own food, stitched their own clothes, and fetched their own water. Why would they need to work out if they've been doing work all day? You'll never see a construction worker get off his 12-hour shift and go start practicing layups. The people who weren't doing this hard work were wealthy rich kids, and without an outlet, they had a lot of energy. Bourdieu says that schools needed a way for these boys to calm down, so they started playing games as a way to spend time during the day and get them to calm down. As schools do with everything, they structured these games with rules and referees, in effect giving birth to organized sports. Okay, we got that. But what kind of sports were these boys playing? Well, sports that they played into older age. Bourdieu makes a really interesting discovery. Sporting activity, whose frequency rises very markedly with education level, declines more slowly with age, as do cultural practices when education level is higher. He continues, it is known that among the working classes, the abandonment of sport, an activity whose play-like character seems to make it particularly appropriate to adolescence, often coincides with marriage and entry into the serious responsibilities of adulthood. He's saying that working class people, they like sports, sure, but they don't have the economic capital or spare time to continue once they become adults. They will play during their teen years, but once they get married, get a job, settle down, working class people stop playing sports. This is not true of the elite, though. If they have the money and spare time, they can keep doing whatever they want. They have the privilege of fun. Now, we're hitting a point in sports where a lot of people are playing. You've got the working class adolescents and the elite wealthy people from adolescence into adulthood. What do these people do? Well, they start competing. You may not agree that exercise is in human nature, but I would argue that competition is. We love conflict, and sports are a phenomenal form of conflict. They're detached from anything real, and as these competitions start, sports become increasingly organized with rules and eventually sports organizations. Sporting agencies are interesting because they demonstrate how industrialization influences everything in society. Very quickly, these sports organizations introduce their own rules and make sure people are following them by implementing referees who have the ability to bar players. And eventually, sports organizations give themselves the power to hand out fines and fees for people who protest or ignore their rules. But these rules have a point, and the elite need them to be followed. Sports build character, especially team players. Capitalists want to hire workers that follow this team player mentality. If workers are taught to follow the rules, they'll be better employees for their bosses, being timely and organized. Bourdieu makes this point on the bottom of page 360. Sport is conceived as a training in courage and manliness, forming the character and inculcating the will to win, which is the mark of the true leader, but a will to win within the rules. This is fair play, utterly opposed to the plebeian pursuit of victory at all costs. He continues, the modern definition of sport is an integral idea of a moral idea, i.e. an ethos which is that of the dominant fractions of the dominant class, and is brought to fruition in the major private schools intended primarily for the sons of the heads of industry. To value education over instruction, willpower over intelligence, sport over culture, is to affirm within the educational universe itself the existence of a hierarchy irreducible to the strictly scholastic hierarchy which favors the second term in those oppositions. Okay, let's pause for a second. Bourdieu is saying that sport, as this modern thing, is actually a reflection of the moral ideals of the elite class. Okay, so what are these moral ideals? Instruction, intelligence, and culture, rather than education, willpower, and sport. This is because working class people can get full educations, they can have strong wills, and they can excel in sport. If the elite valued these, they would be on the same playing field as poor people. They absolutely don't want this. So they value things that are exclusive to wealth. Instruction from talented and well-paid teachers, think of Harvard, Yale. Intelligence, which is dependent on what we as a society, or what the most powerful part of a society, deems important. And culture. Wealth has its own culture, and the elite value this culture most highly. It gives more cultural capital, the thing that you can exchange for social capital, from learning things that the elites value. So, for instance, Shakespeare is very important, and having a vast knowledge of his plays will provide lots of cultural capital, which can be exchanged for social capital, or a new developing idea at this time, industrial capital. If you learn everything the elites want you to, if you jump through all of their hoops, then you can earn industrial capital, or a higher position within this quickly evolving industrial society. By learning everything you need to, minding your P's and Q's, you may one day become a vice president of a very important industry. Elites have the ultimate power, choosing who to share it with and deciding what is and isn't important. It means, as it were, disqualifying or discrediting the values recognized by other fractions of the dominant class or by other classes. Not only do the elite discredit the values of the working class, but they also discredit the values of other people of the elite class with less capital than them. If we imagine a pyramid of the society that Bourdieu has laid out, the elite are at the top and all of the dominated classes below. But within each of these classes, there are different fractions. These are their biggest competitors. The sons of school teachers, for example, when put up against the sons of the elite, may be smarter or more athletic. So elites discredit simple intelligence and instead value the school someone went to rather than what they know. So I want to take a moment here and tell you, as a Stony Brook student, you live in a society where you are at a disadvantage to students at Harvard. If you applied to Ivies or other elite institutions and got rejected, I want you to count yourself lucky. This game we're playing, do well in middle school so you can get into a good high school, so you can do well, get into an elite college and graduate, get an elite job, and one day become rich. This is the game. So let me ask you, do you win if you get that elite job and get rich? No. It just means that you officially opt into playing the game of capitalism. And ask yourself, what's the goal of capitalism? Amass all of the capital. You never win until you own everything. Okay, Stony Brook students, this is why we're lucky. We don't have to play that game. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you not to make money. I want to be rich. But please remember that your values are important. This is what Bourdieu is analyzing. The elite of our society have systemically organized us to value their morals over our own. Remember the habitus I talked about at the beginning of this essay? How within the habitus some things are valorized and some are not? You choose what to valorize. Anyway, I digress. Back to the text. Bourdieu wants to talk now. Glorification of sport as the training ground of character always implies a certain anti-intellectualism. When one remembers that the dominant factions of the dominated class always tend to conceive their relations to the dominated fractions, intellectuals, artists, professors, in terms of opposition, it can be seen that sport, like any other practice, is an object of struggles between the fractions of the dominant class and also between the social classes. So, even something seemingly as simple as sport is dominated by the elites of our society. The sports we play, how we play them, is subtly controlled by factors we cannot see, factors that have been here for centuries, factors that exclusively uplift the wealthy and push down the poor. The social definition of sport is an object of struggles, that the field of sporting practices is the site of struggles in which what is at stake is the monopolistic capacity to impose the legitimate definition of sporting practice and of the legitimate function of sporting activity. This field is itself part of the larger field of struggles over the definition of the legitimate body and the legitimate use of the body. Bourdieu says there are two legitimate uses of the body, which he defines as pedagogic and scientific. Pedagogic can be thought of as the philosophy behind weightlifting. Strength is key and is useful in labor. On the other hand, the goal of the scientific use of the body is to extend agility into later life, to keep the body moving and make it more physically appealing without being too obscene. The battle for the legitimate use of the body lies between these two poles. Being a member of the elite relies heavily on economic capital or wealth, but also on physical appeal. You are not a member of the elite if you work with your hands, no matter how much money you make. You may be rich, but the elite society work with their heads, controlling industry and the flow of the economy. In this context, there is a heavy cultural emphasis on having smooth hands, dressing in tight, well-fitting suits that restrict mobility, and participating in sports like fencing, which have cultural capital and physical appeal. Now, we've reached the end of page 6. Next time, we'll dive deeper into why fencing is an elite sport and the barriers used to isolate it and other elite sports from the general public. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that this has been helpful. If you still need help understanding this text, please rewatch this video, take notes, or reach out to your professor or TA for more help. Best of luck with Bourdieu, and I'll see you in part 2.